Good morning, my YouTube viewers, says Palestine. Welcome to my channel. This is the second video I've made this morning, one of them being a data science video on my data science channel under Crystal X if you're interested in data science. This is a video that I've been meaning to make for a while, and it's going to be called My Negative Experience with Law Enforcement. And basically what I want to talk about is the really negative experience that I've had with law enforcement, specifically with regard to when I was working at my former employer, Foster Wheeler. So basically what happened is when I realized that it was, when I was being harassed out of my job at Foster Wheeler, because this went on for a very long time, because it was a company-wide project to harass me out of the company. And it wasn't just one person, it was several people. And the IT department was deeply involved in this project. And so the IT department was a really big department, and they could do all kinds of things, such as monitor my work emails and my work telephone calls. But I do believe that they also monitored my personal emails, my personal telephone calls, and I believe that they hacked into my phone. I believe that they cloned my phone, and then they made my life miserable. And I've got lots of videos that I want to make with this regard to all of my negative experiences. But the one negative experience that I'm going to focus on in this video is my negative experience with law enforcement. And so basically, I had to think about what I wanted to call it, because I have to think about what I want to say in my video, so there won't be any comeback onto me. So I'll be able to keep my channel, and they won't phone the police, because Foster Wheeler has phoned the police on me on occasion. And so basically what happened was, I knew I was being stalked. I knew I was being gang stalked, but I didn't know who was behind it. So I made a grievance with Foster Wheeler, and then when I made the grievance, I asked that they phone the police. Well, of course, they weren't going to phone the police because they were the ones doing it. They weren't going to phone the police because they were doing it. And so basically, I didn't get anywhere with my grievance. They wrote me this nasty letter that brought me to tears, because I was just sure that when I made a grievance, the problem would be resolved and everything would go back to normal. But everything wasn't going to go back to normal, because Foster Wheeler was the mastermind behind this gang stalking. And I believe it was for financial purposes, because I was a single woman on my own in the UK with no dependents. In the UK, no dependents, no next of kin. So if something happened to me, they could have opened an insurance policy on me, which I do believe they did, and keep the money. Whoever it was, the beneficiary, would get the money. Well, sorry to disappoint you, Foster Wheeler and others. I didn't die like you wanted me to die. I'm still here, and I'm going to talk about what happened while I was in that company. And so Foster Wheeler, they didn't phone the police because they were behind it. They were doing it. And so when I realized that it was Foster Wheeler that was behind it, I made a complaint to the police. Did the police do anything? No. And not only did the police not do anything, they called me into their office to speak to me. And I thought they were going to speak to me about the complaint that I had made against them. But they didn't. They were really nasty. And this was the police in the town I live in. They were really nasty. And they said, if you don't like your job, just quit. And I think that I mentioned something about maybe having a bad hip or something like that. And so they were trying to turn it around onto me. They didn't try, they did. They turned it around onto me to make me the bad person. And they tried to say that I was threatening, which how could I be threatening? I was a little middle-aged woman being attacked by my employer, and they were just saying, if you don't like your job, just quit. That is not something that the police should say. And so I do believe that these big companies have policemen on their payroll. I do believe that the police is in the pocket of these big companies. And Foster Wheeler was a multinational company. I believe that the police was in their pocket. The only reason why Foster Wheeler is still in existence today is because whistleblowers came forward and exposed their corrupt business activities. Nobody's ever exposed the way they treated their employees, but they exposed their corrupt business activities. And that's why Foster Wheeler has gone down the tubes, because of what happened. Foster Wheeler was sold to AMAC, then it became AMAC Foster Wheeler. They ran that company to the ground. Samira Brinko, who was the CEO of AMAC, became the CEO of AMAC Foster Wheeler. When they ran, Foster Wheeler ran that company to the ground. The board of directors for AMAC, or AMAC Foster Wheeler, asked Samira Brinko to leave. So Samira Brinko didn't want to leave, he wanted to stay and weather the storm, but they had lost confidence in him for his bad business decision to buy Foster Wheeler. And then so AMAC had to be sold to Wood Group, and Wood Group had to take on all of the financial liabilities that had been incurred by Foster Wheeler. And so basically, Wood Group had to pay all these fines. They had to write off all these contracts because when people had found out what Foster Wheeler had done, they didn't want to work with Foster Wheeler. They didn't want to work with AMAC Foster Wheeler anymore. So Wood Group had to write off all of these contracts that had pretty much dissolved. They had to pay all the fines incurred as a result of Foster Wheeler's corrupt business dealings. So Wood Group is down the tubes. And so basically Wood Group has been sold to a consortium or a group of companies that are under the Sadara umbrella. So Wood Group is now owned by Sadara, but Wood Group got to keep its name. So Wood Group is still called Wood. In fact, it's no longer Wood Group, it's Wood. And Wood got to keep its name, but it's now owned by a Middle Eastern company called Sadara, which is a group of companies. And I believe that this is multinational. This is multinational. I believe that the police are in the pockets of these multinational organizations like Foster Wheeler. The only reason why Foster Wheeler is no longer in existence is because whistleblowers came forward and exposed Foster Wheeler's corrupt business practices, which was basically, in a nutshell, what they were doing is they were employing third parties to bribe government officials and so they could buy contracts. So this came out in the Petrobras company. Petrobras is a Brazilian company, and Petrobras is like owned by the Brazilian government. But it wasn't just Brazil, it was all over. Nigeria, India, US, UK, all over. But Petrobras is one company that was involved in this, and I think it's called Operation Car Wash. And so when they had Operation Car Wash, what they did was they kept these executives in Petrobras and Brazil, they kept them in prison because normally they could just bribe the officials, bribe the police. And then normally when they got arrested or whatever, they would bribe people and they would get out of jail. But in Operation Car Wash, they were trying to clean up Brazil. And so the bribery didn't work and they kept them in prison. And then or jail, or prison or jail, wherever it was they were. And then so basically what would happen was these business executives would crack under pressure. And then when they cracked, because they thought that they would be able to bribe their way out of jail or prison, and they realized that they couldn't bribe their way out of jail or prison, they started talking. And then that's when it all came out under Operation Car Wash. And this was in Brazil, and one of the companies involved was Petrobras. But what Foster was doing was on a global scale. And they were doing it with lots of different countries and companies. And Nigeria was another country that was involved in Foster Wheeler's global corporate corruption. And so I do believe that the police is in the pockets of these multinational companies like Foster Wheeler. And so, yeah. These companies, these multinational companies, are bribing the police. And so whenever I made a complaint to the police, of course I didn't get anywhere because they're being bribed. They were being bribed by Foster Wheeler, And they just told me if I didn't like my job to quit. And basically they turned it around on me and trying to make it look like I was the one that was the threat. Even though I was just a little middle-aged woman, all on my own. And then so basically, I got kicked out of Foster Wheeler. And so a year or so later, I found out that employees from Foster Wheeler had gone to people who I believed to be my friends and said things about me that were untrue to these people who I believed to be my friends. And instead of my friends coming to me and telling me what people from Foster Wheeler were saying about me, they spread it around too. So, yeah, these people were not my friends. A friend would not do that. A friend would have come to me and said, look, this is what's being said about you. They didn't tell me. I didn't find out for a year or two what had happened. And they said things about me that were untrue with regard to the reasons why I left Foster Wheeler. So I'm no longer friends with those people anymore. And I remember what happened when I realized that I knew I'd been betrayed by Foster Wheeler, but when I realized that my friends had betrayed me too, that I would have heaves of nausea. Like, if you see these TV shows and stuff, like somebody has encountered something so bad that they have to vomit. Well, I didn't vomit, but I would have these waves of nausea where I would feel like I was going to vomit. And then so basically, my friends had betrayed me, and it was such a betrayal that I'd have waves of nausea. And that went on for a long time. And then so I decided, well, if Foster Wheeler is going to talk about me, I'm going to talk about them. So I went on to social media like Facebook, and I was saying on Facebook the things that they did to me. Well, one of the things that was done to me by an employee of Foster Wheeler was I was assaulted by an employee of Foster Wheeler. And then so I put that on social media. Well, Foster Wheeler didn't like that. By this time, it was AMEC Foster Wheeler. But Foster Wheeler and AMEC Foster Wheeler didn't like that. So they phoned the police to try to have me arrested. And then they were saying they were worried about my mental health. Foster Wheeler was never been worried about my mental health. Foster Wheeler wanted to make my mental health worse. Foster Wheeler spread it all over that I was mentally ill. And it wasn't their place to do that because they weren't doctors. It was just plain maliciousness and spite. They were saying that I was mentally ill because they were trying to come up with an excuse about why I would say these things about the company that I was working for. And so, because the police are being bribed by Foster Wheeler and other multinational companies, they phoned CMHT, that's Community Mental Health Team. And then so CMHT phoned me up and said, I want you to take all this stuff about Foster Wheeler off, everything you posted. I want you to take all this stuff about Foster Wheeler off the internet. And they said, if you're not careful, then you can be charged with malicious communication. Foster Wheeler was never charged with any malicious communication towards me. When I found out that Foster Wheeler had approached my friends and said things that employees of Foster Wheeler approached my friends and said things about me with regard to why I left Foster Wheeler that were not true, I went to Citizens Advice Bureau because I wanted to see if I could sue Foster Wheeler for libel or slander, because I knew where it came from. It came directly from Foster Wheeler. All these lies and gossip came directly from Foster Wheeler. And CAB just told me that if I was going to sue Foster Wheeler, I would need to have a lot of money to do it. And of course, I didn't have any money, so I didn't sue it. I couldn't do it. I couldn't sue them for what they had done because I didn't have any money to sue them. But yeah, that didn't stop, because the police aren't going to listen to me. The police won't do anything that I say because the police are being bribed by Foster Wheeler. I do believe that the police were in the pockets of Foster Wheeler. So police wouldn't do a thing for me. But when I put on Foster Wheeler, when I put on social media, i.e. Facebook, what Foster Wheeler had done to me, namely, being assaulted by another employee of Foster Wheeler, they phoned the police and tried to have me arrested. And then so then they couldn't have me arrested because they'd already said I had a mental illness. So they got CMHT involved, and that's Community Mental Health Team. So then I had to talk to CMHT about it. So CMHT came to my house and wanted to speak to me. And the thing is I told CMHT what this individual who assaulted me did. And the CMHT said, well, would you like to go to the police? We can go to the police and make a report. And I said, well, what good is it going to be for me to make a report to the police about what this person has done? Because the police haven't helped me so far. The police haven't acted on my complaints so far. So if I go to the police and tell them this guy assaulted me, they're not going to do anything. And they're probably going to just say, try to charge me with wasting police time or something like that. So I didn't want to go to the police about what this guy had done. And he didn't hurt me as bad as a lot of other people had done. But it was still assault nevertheless because I didn't agree to it. And then basically, Foster Wheeler tried to have me arrested because I posted on social media what they had done to me. And then so now, and then after that happened, well, because Foster Wheeler was still owned by AMAC, so it was AMAC Foster Wheeler, then I started being harassed by my neighbors, or what I believed to be my neighbors, but I still think Foster Wheeler could have had something to do with that as well. And so I'm not going to say what they did, but they were vandalizing my property, but I'm not going to say what it is that they did. And I found the police. Did the police do anything? No. Police did nothing. And so I made a complaint to the police because the police didn't do anything. I also want to point out that the guy that lived across from me in 2012 died. Police didn't do anything about that. There was never any investigation about that. They said, I looked at a newspaper article and they said that his findings of his death were inconclusive, and people at Prospect Park told me that his death was of natural causes, and that's not what the newspaper report said, because all these police and medical professionals and things like that. A lot of these people are being bribed by multinational corporations to go in favor of the multinational corporation. And so I can't say what it was that was done, but I do believe it was my neighbors and some other people. And I don't disbelieve that Foster Wheeler had something to do with this, because it was still Amec Foster Wheeler. There was still the Foster Wheeler name. So I got sectioned again, and every time I got sectioned, police would come to the house and arrest me. So the 2 times I've been sectioned, the police would come to my house and arrest me. And then later on, when all this stuff was going on, I wanted to know what the police were saying about me. And then so basically you can do something called a subject access request. So I did a subject access request, and I got my police report. Okay, and so this police report, pretty much every comment that was made, every single comment that was made, they were saying that I had mental health problems. It didn't matter what the communication was about. Didn't matter what it was about. They said I had mental health problems. And then so I went to the Information Commissioner, and I tried to get these comments removed from my records. And Information Commissioner said that they couldn't do anything about it, because they said that the police are allowed to put their opinions in my records. So it was their opinion that I had mental health problems. And so basically that nothing was done. And I can't overstate this enough. I do believe that the police are being bribed by Foster Wheeler and other multinational corporations. And the police are in the pockets of Foster Wheeler and other multinational corporations. So of course they were going to, every single statement pretty much said they weren't going to respond to me because I had mental health problems. And then finally, I received a letter from the police, and they said that if I wrote them again, they were just going to file it away and not read it. And another thing that you need to know is if you're being treated for a mental illness, and they know that, they don't have to respond to you. And so basically, when I made it to Prospect Park, which was the mental hospital, they said, do you mind if we contact the police? So I thought they were going to contact the police to tell them what I was, the harassment I was enduring. But they contacted the police basically and told them I was nuts, and the police, and I was under their care. So the police have in their records that I'm under the care of the crisis team, which I'm not under the care of the crisis team, but they put it in their records that I was under the care of the crisis team. And so they said that if I had any complaints, I needed to go to the crisis team. So the police won't respond. If the police believe you to be mentally ill, they won't respond. The police can put it in your records that you're mentally ill, because they're allowed to put their opinions in your record. And their opinion was that I was mentally ill. And so basically the police were conspired with Foster Wheeler to say that I was mentally ill. And the reason why is because Foster Wheeler didn't want it coming out how they were treating their employees. And I do think, I was looking on the internet about how employers can find ways to make money off of their employees. And one of the ways that they make money off their employees is to take insurance policies out on them. Since I was single in the UK, no dependents, all on my own, I do believe that they took an insurance policy out on me, and the police didn't do anything about it. So I've covered all of the instances that I've had with police from the time that I worked at Foster Wheeler until now. And all the instances have been negative instances. Foster Wheeler never acted on not even one complaint The police never acted on not even one complaint that I made about Foster Wheeler. But all Foster Wheeler had to do was pick up the phone to the police and try to get me arrested. Well, they didn't get me arrested, but they got me involved with CMHT. So, in a nutshell, my experience of the police is very bad. I don't want to have anything to do with the police. I do believe that police officers, as well as other government officials, are being bribed by Foster Wheeler and other big companies. And I do believe that the police is in the pocket of Foster Wheeler and other big companies. And if somebody makes a complaint to the police about Foster Wheeler and other companies' practices, the police aren't going to do anything because the police are being bribed by them and they're on their payroll. And that's just what I think, based upon my personal experience of what Foster Wheeler did to me. So I'm going to go ahead and close this video because I've talked about my very negative experience with law enforcement. And it's a video that I've wanted to make for several days now, but I had to be able to have some time by myself to actually make this video. So if you like my video, please like and subscribe. Thank you so much for taking an interest in my life, as pathetic as it is. Thank you.